Dr. Ayala, some people say that the elements needed for the first cell that was needed for evolution to begin could not have existed in the early Earth environment. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Progress towards understanding the origin of life has been tremendous, precisely in the last few years. One of the persons who got the Nobel Prize this year in chemistry have done some important discoveries along those lines, and almost every year we have new discoveries that are starting to take shape, making us understand a little bit more how life may have first originated. We don't have the answer yet, at least in a satisfactory answer, but I have no reason to believe that eventually we will not have the answer.
If I understood the question correctly, it concerned the origin of the first cell of life itself. And this is not something we've talked about tonight. We have been focusing on biology and the evolution of biological complexity. But if you go back before that, you have this enormous question of how life itself originated, and then even before that, the fine-tuning of the universe to make the universe suitable for the origin and evolution of life. And if you're interested in pursuing this, an excellent new book is Stephen Meyer's book, The Signature in the Cell, which shows the difficulties of arriving at the first primitive cell by either chance or by some kind of protein evolution. It just isn't understood at all how this could happen by undirected processes. Now, just in August, there was some very exciting research announced where scientists were able to synthesize 2 RNA bases that could help to explain how, from an ID perspective, God arranged the chemical origins to bring about life. But the problem is that these can't exist in nature without being immediately destroyed. You would need to have some kind of superintendence or supervision in order to pull this off and get it into a cellular organism that would be alive. But Meyer's work is very good on this if you're interested.
Dr. Craig, how can Dembski's improbability criterion be a useful tool for justifying design inferences?
Yeah, I'm not following Brad. There's an echo, and so it's a little difficult to hear.
How can Dembski's improbability criterion be a useful tool for justifying design inferences? It's vague, and it seems that one can never make a conclusive case that something is sufficiently improbable and thus has to be designed.
Well, I guess I don't think that that's a good objection at all. Dembski talks about a probability bound beyond which anything is so improbable that it could not happen by chance alone. And he computes this mathematically. And in addition to that, the rational person will make decisions based upon probabilities. So that if you're able to formulate probabilities about the origin of any phenomenon, and it's sufficiently improbable, and then it conforms to an independently given pattern, that combination will tip you off that it's not the result of chance but of design. So, for example, if, say, Bob got a birthday present, his wife gave him a car for his birthday. Now, if that had a license plate number that said CHT 728, out of all of the possible license plate numbers, that's enormously improbable that he would get that. But that wouldn't occasion any surprise. That would seem by chance. But suppose Bob was born on August 8, 1978, and the license plate said BOB 8878. Well, then he would be obtuse to say, well, there's nothing unusual about that, nothing to be explained here. It's highly improbable, plus it conforms to an independently given pattern, and that tips you off that this isn't just the result of chance. So it seems to me that Dembski's criteria are quite manageable and are good.
You know about improbabilities. It may amuse you, and I was mentioning today to somebody that I'm receiving this year, like every year, several honorary degrees This year I finished 7. What is the probability that 2 universities in 2 different countries will offer to present me the honorary degree on exactly the same day, November 24? One, the University of Buenos Aires, and the University of South Bohemia. Very low, but things happen. But that's because I have some angels that work to my benefit, because I told the people in Buenos Aires, 24th of November, I'll go to Buenos Aires, and I told the guys in the Czech Republic, you better move it to May. 24th of November in Czechoslovakia is 10 degrees below zero. But now, more seriously, going back to the argument of improbability, you know, you don't need to argue with Professor Dembski, because by his own argumentation he does not exist. You see, his genetic makeup has a mother component and a father component. The mother during her life produced about 500 eggs, each one with different genetic composition. The father produce about 10 to the 12 sperm with a different genetic composition. The probability that he would get the 2 right compositions is 10 to the minus 15. That's bad enough. But the probability that his father had the right genetic composition is 10 to the minus 15. That his mother had the right genetic composition is 10 to the minus 15. So going 1 generation back, the probability that Dr. Dembski exists by his own argumentation is 10 to the minus 45. If I go 1 more generation, the probability he exists is smaller than the reciprocal of the number of atoms in the universe. Those arguments have no seriousness for any serious scientist.
Dr. Ayala, does a God who sits by idly while natural mechanisms produce generations of baby-killing baboons, for example, seem any less cruel or impotent than the God who has designed them?
I apologize, but I think you have to tell me again.
Okay.
We are getting an effect here.
Very difficult to hear.
Which probably you don't. So maybe you should be answering the question, because you probably hear it better.
Does a God who sits by idly while natural mechanisms produce generations of baby-killing baboons seem any less cruel or impotent than a God who has designed them?
Oh, there's a big difference. You see, I live in Irvine, and just across from my house is an ecological reserve where my wife and I walk almost every evening. There are lots of coyotes. Assume that a coyote comes and attacks me and bites me. Is that an act of cruelty, or is it an immoral act? No, this coyote is not a moral subject. Now assume that when I'm walking the next day, a mugger comes with a dog and attacks me with a dog, and the dog bites me. Then there's a moral act, the moral act of the mugger, not of the dog. So I think it's a big difference between attributing design, immediate design to God, or having consequences of this work which is so diverse. For the same reason we don't attribute our sins to God. We have freedom because God has given us free will, but we don't attribute to God our sins. We are moral subjects, the baboons are not.
Well, this issue came up in the forthcoming issue of the journal Theology and Science in a discussion of Dr. Ayala's view. And it's interesting that the participants there see exactly the same problem that the questioner did. Chris Doran, in his article, says, Ayala's strategy only pushes the problem back 1 step and thus ultimately leaves us in much the same place we were before. And so you've got to ask, well, why would there be a God who would create human beings by means of a process which would result in so much miscarriage and death? And Dr. Ayala's answer to Chris Doran, and you heard it tonight, is simply that, well, that kind of world is more exciting. Well, that doesn't seem to me to be a very persuasive justification for the permission of that sort of pain and suffering and death. I think we need a much more powerful theodicy than simply saying that a world with evolution is exciting. And so that's why I tried to offer a bit of a theodicy in my final speech for animal pain and suffering. And I, in my written works, have a great deal more to say about human pain and suffering as well. and why a loving and omnipotent God might prefer a world that involves this kind of suffering rather than a world in which there is no suffering at all.